of community. Structure and stratification of community. Right. So, what is community? Community is nothing but a group of several animals or plant species which live together with a mutual tolerance and shows a beneficial interaction within themselves in a definite area is called as community. Okay, the community ecology deals with the group of different kinds of population in an area, right? So, the community shows the physical appearance like a relative size, stratification, distribution of population, and species. Species diversity or the richness. Again, the species abundance. Now, the niche structure. So, the number of ecological niche, the species interaction with similarities and the differences. So, the next slide that shows the characteristics of a community. The characteristics by which a community is designed are as follow. First one is species diversity. What is species diversity or a richness? A biotic community has a producer, consumers, and a decomposers. Within these species diversity, some population exert more influences than other in the community because they share a higher percentage of energy flow. Now, the what we can say, the next one is growth and the structure. What is growth and the structure? So, community is usually described in the terms of growth forms. The growth form is a general appearance of the plant. These growth forms are directly influenced by the environmental factor. Now, the dominance. We can say the growth forms, so the different kinds of the plant, that is broadleaf plants, shortleaf plants, evergreen plants. So these are the different structure of a plants. Now the dominance. In each community, one or few species dominate in either in a number or in a physical characteristic or both in other species. The dominant species are called ecological dominants. Like some species are dominant, that species are known as dominant species. Now the succession. What is succession? Succession is very important, right? The succession is very important in the development of community. Community develops as a result of directional change in it within time, right? Succession, each and every community has its own developmental history. It develops as a result of directional change in it within with time, right? Now the trophic structure. There are three broad trophic level in a community, which are producers, consumers, and the decomposers. The food produced by all kinds, the green plants is consumed directly or indirectly by the all kinds of the animal. So these are known as consumers. The dead bodies and even the excreta of both producers and consumers are decomposed by the decomposers like a microbe into simple substances. These are called decomposers of the community. Right. Now, the classification of community. So, physiognomic classification, the classical classification is totally depend on the general appearance of plant is termed or physiognomic classification. Okay. Philanthrophytes, this is the plant, maybe trees, shrubs, climbers. In this plant are growing birds are not well protected and are located in upright shoots much above the ground surface. Now, the classification of community on the availability of water. So, the hydrophytes are the plants. They grow, develop and grow in aquatic habitat. Number 2 is mesophyte. So, these mesophytes plants, they require the moderately moist soil. And number 3 is xerophytes. Xerophytes, they grow in arid or a dry condition like deserts. Now, the availability of light. So, the classification of community on the availability of light, that is heliophyte, that is abundant light required, and ceophytic, that is growing in a shade, right? Now, the next one. So, the classification of community depending on the alteration of plant composition. So, cereal community and the climax community. So what is serial community? It is the second step in ecological succession. So intermediate community, it is replaced rapidly. And number one is a climax community. So what is climax community? Climax community is nothing but the finals and the stable community. So generally remains the same if undisturbed. So type of climax community will vary depending on the ecosystem. So climax community of a desert is different from the tropical rainforest, right? So both primary and the secondary succession end with a climax community. Next one is classification of community depending on the geographical distribution. So what is biotic province? The biotic province in 1876 Wallace suggested the world could be divided into 6 biogeographic regions referred as a regional necrotic, neotropical, okay. So Oriental, Australian and para-Asiatic, Ethiopian. So these are the biogeotropic regions. Now the concrete community is a specific area which can be observed directly and which is a semblance of plant and animal that actually exist. So these are the classification of community depend on the composition, availability of water, distribution, geographical distribution, right? So the next one is what is community structure in appearance and specific diversity. In that stratification, species diversity, species richness, structure and age effect, right? Now the next is the stratification. Okay, so stratification, as we know that stratification forms one of the outstanding general principle of community structure. Organisms are distributed unevenly throughout the biotic community, resulting in the stratification. The stratification is a community may be resulted by some factors like specific toleration and the adaptation, chemical reaction taking place between the byproducts and physical stratification. Next to that, the other organisms take up the temporary or the permanent residence as a directness sponge to the presence of the initial resident. The stratification in community, it may be horizontal, vertical in a horizontal and vertical, and is different in aquatic and the terrestrial habitat. Now the horizontal stratification in a pond. So you can see the horizontal stratification in a water bodies. Thus you can see here, so there are zonation depend on the composition and the depth of the water bodies. So what are the zonation? You can see here the different zones of water are there, littoral zones, okay. So these are the different zones. For example, bottom mud, okay, submerged plants, semi submerged plants, littoral zone, benthic zone, okay, again that benthos, okay. So these are the different zones. Now the zones in horizontal stratification in a lake. So thermocline, the point at a water temperature begins to steadily drop off. Number is 2 is holocline, the boundary between oxic and anoxic water. Oxic means the water having the oxygen and anoxic means the water that don't have the oxygen. So the oxic and the anoxic water and the salinity gradient respectively. Monomolybdenum formed in a hypolimnion is deep and enough to never mix with the upper layer. Now you can see here the different type of zones, okay. Now the intertidal zone, necrotic zone and the oceanic zone. So you can see here this necrotic zone is near the shore, oceanic zone is a deep sea zone. Again, the photic zone. Photic zone means the sun where the sunlight can reach. Now, the benthic zone. Benthic means the deep zone. A photic zone means the where water can where sunlight cannot penetrate. That zone is a photic zone. Again, the pelagic zone. Pelagic means the upper water layer is known as pelagic zone. On a pelagic zone, the phytoplanktons that can grow. Again, abyssal zone. Abyssal zone is the what we can say, this portion, the base portion is known as abyssal zone, right? Now, the horizontal stratification. The horizontal stratification in a rainfall in a given area. Okay, it is a separating sub-communities in a mountain regions as a whole community. For example, you can see here the so you can see here, okay, this is the hot land, temperate land, cold land, frozen land, okay, and the snow land. Sorry, and the snow land. So this is the Andes mountain horizontal stratification, right? And this is a tree line. Okay, so these lines are nothing but the tree lines. Now the stratification. So layers of the rainforest, that is horizontal stratification in a forest ecosystem. So what we took the example of the layer of rainforest. So you can see here the different layers we can see. So this is one layer, this is a one, this is one, and this is the one layer. So soil, so canopy, the canopy, sub canopy, tree fern layer, so shrub layer, forest floor. You can see this is the forest floor. So as we know that the forest floor is rich in humus and the litter. Now that the litter layer, topsoil layer, subsoil layer, and the soil parent material. Now the vertical stratification based on the organism. Now the profoundal zone. This is the zone of water is too deep for the sunlight to penetrate. With that zone we can say a photic zone. A photic zone is also known as profoundal zone. So the photosynthesizing plant and animal can't exist there, right? So only the photic zone that contains the phytoplanktons as well as zooplanktons and the water plant. Benthic zones, the deepest layer in the body of water, so the having a low temperature and the low oxygen.